There were 1,000 people in the hall, and I said, my name is Chris Smith. I'm the Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and I'm gay.
A group of us in the Gay Liberation Front hit on the idea of holding a gay pride march to challenge that shameful view.
Equality, and for some people in Stonewall, like me, equality was kind of like what you got to as a starting point.
Welcome to The View From Here, the podcast that explores the lives of key people in the LGBTQ+ movement. I'm James.
And I'm Jonathan. We hope you enjoy the podcast. For our first episode, we're joined by Michael Cashman, a former MEP, actor, and co-founder of Stonewall. Today's episode explores themes of identity, transformation, and the politics of visibility.
And we hear powerful reflections and stories from Michael. You'll hear how art, politics, and deep compassion forged a lifelong commitment to change.
Michael, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
You were born in 1950 in Limehouse, and you were brought up in Limehouse. And I would like to take you back there and ask, in general terms, what that was like. London has changed a dramatic amount in the intervening period, but also what it was like for a young kid who started to realize that he was gay.
I'm lucky in that I'm now living back in Limehouse, 500 yards from the sprawling, amazing council estate that I was born on, that kind of went down to the edge of the Thames. The Thames that was our playground. Me and my three other brothers, that was where we went. It was an adventure. We jumped from barge to barge. When we get together, we often say, my God, if we did now what we did then, our parents would be locked up instead of us being locked up. Knowing I was different, it was the best place to be because it was a docks. Strangers came through the gates, so nobody, interestingly, was a stranger. And colour and difference and extravagance didn't matter. It was part of an amazing mosaic of primary colours, and the subtlety was seen elsewhere. I mean, my mum and dad, often when I go past the corner of where Charlie Brown's pub was, where people used to come from the West End to witness the fights and the gangland brutality. But there was a warmth and a femininity about the place. My mum and dad would often bring home a drag queen or an old camp sailor on a Friday night that they would suddenly foster for the weekend. And knowing I was different, I knew at the earliest age that I was attracted to other boys. Sadly, it must have been invisibly tattooed on my forehead because some men noticed it too. But to grow up there was to be given the most amazing canvas upon which I could paint, but upon which I could also disappear. And by disappearing and learning, that's what gay men of my generation had to do. And I think a lot of gay men and LGBT people still do. You find other personas to paste on the outside. And pasting them on the outside allowed me to observe and to absorb. And it was that really changed my life when Eartha Kitt manifested herself in the young me at the age of 11, but that's another story.
And how did you disappear? What does it mean to disappear? And I think you say a lot of people still find themselves disappearing. The challenge, I suppose, is to stop yourself from disappearing once you've got into the habit of doing that. How did you talk us through that?
I think it was learning to merge, learning not to stand out, learning not to look at a boy in the eyes, learning not to sit too long and adore somebody getting dressed alongside you or swimming with you. It was that disappearing. It was taking something about you, the orchid, away from you, and just being there amongst the evergreens. And I remember, and I put this into my memoir because it was so strong. When I went to my secondary modern school at the age of 11, a place where it was a war zone. I didn't fit in. And I remember that day at PE, physical education, that I used to hate.
We can all relate to that.
And there was this beautiful boy, Anthony, and he let me watch him get dressed. And the fact that he knew I was watching him sent the most amazing warmth, shuddering through my body. I think for the first time, I belonged in the company of another male. And that was incredible. And interestingly, he and I ended up having a brief affair in our 20s.
Oh.
Yeah. Hadn't seen him for years and years and years. And we met at the local steam bath in the East End. And he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I looked at this amazing, gorgeous man with a body to match. And I said, "No." And he went, "It's Tony." And I rolled back the years. And yeah, we went out one night, got rather drunk. And the rest, they say, is written into my DNA.
You know, I think one of the narratives that is common amongst all LGBT people is the coming out narrative. We all have one. We have a first time. We all tend to have to do it over and over and over and over again.
You never stop.
Do you remember your coming out narrative? When was the first time you told somebody else that you were gay? Did you have that vocabulary?
No, I didn't have the vocabulary. That's why I'm so passionate about safeguarding and informing young kids. You empower them. You give them a sense of what life is like, relationships that are appropriate and inappropriate, but you give them the words. And I wish the young Michael that suffered for years at the hands of one paedophile in particular felt that he had the language and would be believed to say what was happening. But I came out when I said to, by then I was a young actor at the age of 12, and I was in Oliver in the West End, and there was a boy that I fell in love with, and I'm pleased to say he fell in love with me, and I told him I loved him, and I said, what I'm going to do is get a penny for each of us, and we're going to bend it so that when I see you and we're out together, I can show you that, and you'll know that I love you. And he did exactly the same. And of course, you come out, as you said, Jonathan, many, many times, and you have to choose. Do I come out again? Spinning right the way forward when my late husband died, and people say, "Oh, I'm sorry about your loss." When did your wife die? And you have to make the choice. And that again is why I'm equally passionate about how we treat people, LGBT plus people, who may end up going into institutionalized social care, and whether they have to come out again as being HIV positive, or whether they come out again because the photograph that is beside the bed. That's why I ache and beg, perhaps it's the wrong word to use, for the normalization of being extraordinary and reinforcing the ordinariness of being extraordinary. So that, and I think we only achieve equality when that difference is taken out of the equation, so that the photograph beside your bed, it doesn't matter. It's somebody you loved, whether it was your brother, your lost twin, or your lover. It's emblematic of love and affection. And interestingly, that is what the enemies of LGBT equality don't get. They only perceive it. They only perceive our identity through sexual activity. They do not understand the concept of loving and love.
To your point about coming out almost every day when you do a new, meet a new group of people, or you start a new job, or you do a new, even as you say, and I hadn't really thought about this in sort of social care settings where people might have new partners or not new partners, new nurses, new doctors, new carers.
Hopefully new partners.
Potentially new partners. Who knows? In a social, I hadn't even thought about the fact that actually, as you get older, you might actually have to come out almost on a daily basis in a way that I hadn't really considered up until you said that.
I'll tell you a lovely story, and I'll tell it quickly. My wonderful, wonderful old literary agent, who died quite a few years ago, was in a secure unit with dementia. And I went in, and the nursing sister said, oh, Mr. Cashman, you know Eric rather well. I wonder if you could have a word with him because he keeps jumping in bed with this lady. Now, Eric was like me. He was as gay as a coot. And I said, are you sure? She said, yes. So I went to Eric's room, and we went into the little communal sitting room, and we had a wonderful time. And as we came out, he turned right and to go into this bedroom. And there was this lady lying in her bed, and she went, oh, no, it's him. He's after me. And he went, that bloody woman. And he went to go over to her and got into bed with her. And I said, Eric, what are you doing? He went, she's in my bed. And it suddenly dawned on me that this gay man who suddenly we had to prove his gayness, right? This gay man, of course, had the map of his apartment in his head, so that when he came out of his sitting room, he turned right to go into his bedroom. So the ordinariness of recalling your past and then having to affirm a different sexuality to get you out of trouble. I'm sure there's a moral in there somewhere, but even I can't find that.
If we think about your kind of late teenage, early 20s, we're talking about a time when there were two groups really in the activism space in the late 60s, early 70s, the Campaign for Homosexual Equality and the Gay Liberation Front. Did you ever identify with either of those? Did you see yourself as an activist at that time?
I knew about CHE and GLF. In fact, you'd be pretty crazy if you didn't growing up then, because I had my first long-term relationship that started when I was 16, just before the partial decriminalisation in July 1967. And Lee was 8 years older than me. So even though the age of consent was suddenly at 21, he and I had an illegal relationship. So I think through him, I was acutely aware of the political dimension, as well as he kept reinforcing the criminal dimension. But did I identify as an activist? Absolutely not. Interestingly, I was going to call my book The Accidental Activist, because it's a bit like, I ended up in politics. None of this was planned because other people did that. Intelligent people did that. People who went to university, people who knew how to stand up and do a stint at Speaker's Corner. That was the role of other people. I was an ill-educated, poorly educated actor who left school, really, at the age of 12, went to a stage school at the age of 12 and a half, where you did about 2 hours of academic work a day. So the world of activism was something that other people got on with. And it was only, I suppose, we are all activists one way or another, soon as you accept a question or challenge an answer about your sexual orientation or your identity or sense of belonging. But for me, I didn't get involved in those early political events, not really until the mid to late 70s, when I went on my first Pride marches.
Mm-hmm. What drew you to the Pride March? What was, I suppose, because being on a, talking about coming out a minute ago, being on a Pride March is as public a coming out as you can do.
Yeah.
What got you to that place where you were comfortable going on a Pride March or felt compelled to go on a Pride March?
A relationship. I started a 3-year relationship with an amazing, aware, LGBT politically active man, and he helped me find my politics of belonging. And there was a sense in the about 78, 79 of a kind of intolerance growing against LGBT people. It started as early as that, and the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher made political capital out of the positive work that was being done by certainly not only, but certainly London councils like Hackney and Haringey and Islington. So there was a general awareness, if you went to pubs and clubs, that you should show up. But when we did show up, I mean, the first Pride March I went on, I think there were about 500 or 600 of us, and we marched. This is how small they were. We used to march from Marble Arch down to the University College London, and we'd all go into the student house and operate in the student union, I think on 4 floors.
Wow.
And
it wouldn't quite fit in there right now.
No. So it was it was then a very overtly political, because you had more police protecting you than there were people on the march.
I suppose you talked about the government and Margaret Thatcher at the time, and how much did, and maybe this is almost applicable to modern day politics, which we're going to come on to a bit later, but how much did the government whip up homophobia, or how much did the government ride on the back of homophobia that was already prevalent?
I don't think the government whipped up homophobia. I think that when the government saw the tabloids, political parties became enthralled with all of them. You had to win over the tabloids. For me, now, at my age, it sickens my gut that we still allow these people this power, an opinion, an editor or group of editors, this opinion, and to enforce that opinion on a society. So I think Thatcher and Portillo and the others in the government, I forgive, but I don't forget.
You mustn't forget, and that's actually the point of this whole podcast. We cannot forget this.
You cannot forget, because history is repeating itself.
Yep.
And history repeats itself until you stand in the way of history and say, no, there is no further that you will go on that route. And that means going back to what started all of the problems and the dangers, and it's primarily silence, primarily burying your head. And I think Thatcher saw that there was Rupert Murdoch and Rothermere in the Daily Mail, primarily, whipping up the fact that there was the unique, solid family, the nuclear family, and everything else was a threat. The miners were a threat. The left were a threat. Gays, single mothers, the whole range. They pulled us out and represented us as a threat, and were given a gift when they realized that the AIDS virus, the HIV virus, was passing primarily amongst gay and bisexual men, not only, and that it could be used as a threat, a real and physical threat to others. They believed they had a gift from hell, that gift from hell that they could use to annihilate us. And I think that's when Thatcher and the others, aided and abetted by elements of primarily the Christian church, thought they'd go in for the kill and represent gay men in particular, and bisexual men, as a threat to somebody's life.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about that period of time, say post 1984 to I suppose, 1996, when actually being HIV positive was a death sentence. Not anymore, of course. But before we go to there, I just want to ask you a personal question about coming out to your family. I listened to an interview that you gave, and correct me if I've gotten this wrong, but you overheard your dad saying, "Oh, I hope he doesn't go into showbiz because it's all a bunch of poofs." And it made me wonder, what was that coming out process like to your family?
Well, that was when I was 11.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When the talent scout turned up, having witnessed me impersonating Eartha Kitt at the end of term school show and wanted me to audition for Oliver. How he made the connection between Eartha Kitt and Oliver is for him to explain and me to wonder. Although when I did tell Eartha Kitt, I said, it's due to you that I'm in show business, and I explained it, and oh my God, not another fucking queen. So
you had that opportunity to that's amazing.
We were doing an HIV benefit at the Shaftesbury Theatre for one of the big charities, Crusade. And they said, go and tell her. And I knocked on her door and told her. She loved it, but another fucking queen. And thankfully, she didn't ask me to give my impersonation. So when my dad said that when I was 11, any idea of coming out, I wouldn't have known what that meant because I'd come out to myself and I knew I had to keep stumm, as we say in the East End. I was lucky in that, having had that 9-year relationship from the age of 16, that amazing sense of belonging, not having to prove myself physically to anyone, belonging. Even though I belonged within the confines of a small apartment where Lee always said, remember, if anyone asks why we're in this flat together, you're my cousin.
So you presumably were not public to anyone about this. So friends, there was almost no one you confided in.
No. Wow. And he wouldn't be, and he wouldn't be to his family. There's a lovely story that, interestingly, when he died many years later, even though he'd never come out about me, he tried to kill himself a couple of times when we were together. And when he died, his mum put me in the first car with him, which is a real sign of being amongst the closest. And she looked at me and she said, I put your flowers on Leon's coffin because he would have wanted it. And even though he'd never come out to her, that was her way of saying, I knew, and you belong. So it was many years later, shortly after I'd left Lee, when there was my youngest brother, who was a hit and run victim of a motor car, and he was he was having major brain surgery, and we were all in the hospital relatives' room. I can see it now. And my dad said, this is all down to his relationship with Tim, which was my brother's partner at the time. Even though my brother wasn't out to me and I wasn't out to him, we were both gay members of the same family. And I remember looking over to my dad and I said, if you're attacking Danny for the relationship with Tim, you're attacking me for my relationship with Andy, because I've got exactly the same. And he just went, I don't want to know. And he left the room and I went to go after him. And my aunt pulled me back. And then I went home and knew I had to come out to my mum. And my mum looked at me and she went, darling, I've always known. And in a way, guys, that was a promise that I made to myself very early on, that I wouldn't give them expectations that I wasn't going to meet. So when I was invited to my brother's wedding, my eldest brother's wedding, they said, you can bring a girl. And I said, no, I'll bring a mate. And thereafter, they always said, bring a mate. And I thought it was important for me not to raise a lie, because it's, as my good friend Lisa Power says, that from the very earliest age, kindergarten onwards, you're put on the heterosexual slide to life.
I think almost from birth, your parents sort of think, get in their head an idea of what your life is going to be like, which is, of course, is nonsense to do. And you suddenly you like animals. Oh, they're going to be a vet, and so there's all that kind of stuff happens, and it's also this. Well, they're going to grow up and they're going to get married and they're going to have children and I'm going to have grandchildren. And,
Yes.
And so I always think coming out is, because the fact that you're not going to be a vet is something that very gradually happens over time. Oh, actually, he's not actually very good at biology. Probably he's not going to be a vet.
Fades every time.
So that
there's blood.
all of that fades over time, whereas coming out is an instant in time.
Yeah.
And suddenly you go from this vision of someone's life to a completely different one in an instant. Yes. And I think that's one of the most shocking things about coming out for parents. And any friend of mine that's talked to me about coming out to their parents in advance, I've said, please, whatever you do, don't internalize everything they say in the first minute or second or hours, because they are reassessing everything they had in their head about what your life was going to be like.
Yes. And again, spinning forward from our own experience of childhood, that is why inclusive relationship and sex education is so important, because it's not about imposition, unless you're suggesting that the imposition of one is inferior or superior to the other. And I don't actually believe that. I don't believe that heterosexuality or bisexuality or your sexual orientation makes you a decent human being. It's a huge collection of many, many different things. And so therefore, what you do with inclusive education is allow people space to become themselves, to accumulate, a bit like a sponge. And if the sponge is surrounded by goodness, then the balance achieves itself. And it's what I'm fighting now in the House of Lords. This continual suggestion that young people, children, families are at threat from difference. It doesn't. The old tropes, the old Trojan horses that they try to sneak in, are exactly the same.
Yeah. Difference is a threat, and the people that are different are slightly different people that are being targeted. Of course, trans people, asylum seekers. We're going to come on to the trans issue a bit in a minute. But I think that one of the key things there is people's assumptions, and it actually links back to what you said about as you get older in a nursing home, people have made an assumption that you were once married to a woman or whatever, and how do we get to a point in society where people don't make assumptions based on normal lives, in inverted commas, normal heterosexual lives?
I think we get there by removing that difference.
Yeah.
And that was for me, coming from the East End of London, a boy knowing that I was different, and my difference could actually pose a physical threat to me if somebody else found out, and that I was allowed to go into a world on a 45-minute bus ride away where I was judged on turning up on time and doing the job and nothing else. And the freedom as a 12-year-old, I still hold those moments, because they guide you through the perilous mud that we have to deal with every single day.
So I want to take you back to 1984.
Yes.
We got sidetracked.
The New York Times reports an article of a cluster of rare cancer being seen in gay men. And it's the first major newspaper story that eventually becomes about HIV. We realize at that point. We don't realize at that point what it is. You're an adult at this point. Can you tell me your first memories of this illness, what we later learned was HIV, creeping into the consciousness in London?
About 1984, 1985, living back in the East End of London, Paul and I, who became my husband, we were together for 31 years. We'd been together then roughly about 18 months, and we used to go off to one of the local gay discos. Like most places, it was gay on the nights when nobody else wanted to go out. So
like a Tuesday.
Sunday night or Thursday night. And there we were in benches. And I remember Capital Gay was the free London gay paper. And I remember starting to read about it in there. And there was a man, I won't guess at his name, but I used to read his column every week, and it was only, and I would get capital Gay to find out more.
That was the only news source that was reporting anything on it.
Yeah. And so that's where I got most of my information. And then I started to learn about the action on the west coast of America and in New York. Silence equals death. The Keith Haring work that came a bit later, and the anger that came out of New York. I was fortunate in that I knew Martin Sherman, the playwright, wonderful playwright.
And you did Bent.
Who did Bent, wrote Bent. And Martin, knowing Martin and a few other, if you can say, ex-Americans, I gather a greater awareness of the political anger and the anger that there was with Mayor Koch in New York, that the rumor was that he was gay. And of course, later it came out that indeed he was gay, and overseeing the decimation and the silence around HIV. So I became very quickly aware both of the mental, the medical aspects of HIV, but equally the political.
And you talk a little bit about going out on that Tuesday night to that club. Let's lift the mood a little bit. Where did you go out?
Well, Monday night was Bangs again, a great up there on the corner of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street, and it was incredible. You dance away where freedom was just another record away. It was you got in there. I used to drink what they call lager tops, which is a lager with a bit of lemonade on the top. And Paul and I we would dance our asses off, and then find the night bus and get home. And that was Mondays. We didn't really venture to Heaven because that was seen as a bit posh. So we
wow, times have changed.
And there was a man called Tricky Dicky who used to run a series of again one night only discos. Gay, they were gay. They weren't lesbian and gay, but it was primarily gay men, because in those days there was a huge separation between the lesbian and the gay movement. Indeed, often we were at loggerheads, certainly politically, with each other. So we'd go off to Pigeons in the East End, which was on a floor above the main pub on Romford Road in Stratford. And then Tricky Dicky had another place just opposite St Pancras. So those were the kind of places you went. And interestingly, I think we gravitated towards them because there was a sense of community. I remember Rusty, wonderful Jamaican Queen, who called everyone virgin because he knew none of us were. And Rusty used to turn up, he'd get off the bus, and he looked like an off-duty bus conductor, and he'd get off the bus and then go in and then come out he was about 40, I suppose, and he'd come out in the tightest little red football shorts and long football socks and his football shirt, and he'd collect the glasses and he'd help out. And it was, so you were in a community. It was very, very different. And again, we always, because we like to drink, we always found somewhere that you could either get the bus home or you could walk home. And those were the places we went to. Even after I went into, found national fame in BBC Television's EastEnders, these were our places of refuge where you could just be a part of that dancing, popper, lift up out of your head, escaping crowd, escaping from a world outside that was vicious and hard. But then, with the absence of friends who were always there, suddenly not there, AIDS began to make its witness on the scene. And I remember, that lovely feeling of being high and the warmth, and then the warmth of EastEnders, and we used to do lots of benefits around AIDS and HIV for the hospices, because a lot of places wouldn't take us, even when we were dying, even in death. We were sometimes denied a place in a funeral home. Never forget this, that even when we were dead, they didn't want to bury us because of what they said, the threat that we posed. And I remember I was at the old Chelsea hospital doing what they call a celebrity visit. And they used to say, we'll just pop round and make sure everyone is up for a visit. And I knocked on the door of this ward, single bed ward, opened it, and there in the bed was a friend of mine who was HIV positive. And that was how I got to know. And he said to me, "Don't tell anyone. Please don't tell." And I think he died within about 3 months. He went back home, quietly died around his family, probably had a quiet family funeral in that place where other members of his family had gone. And I lost a few friends. But my God, they parted before they went.
I mean, you talk about, right at the very beginning of your life, you wanted to disappear. In the club, you could remove that shadow, that mask, and kind of appear, be yourself. And then, but almost HIV made the community almost want to disappear again as a community. Mm. How did that affect you? Having kind of almost found yourself, come out to the world, and then almost feel like needing to disappear again.
It was what you had to do, but it's what you had to deny yourself, because once you disappeared, then you allow the fabrication to become stronger and more powerful. And when Paul and I were living in Mile End, and the News of the World broke the story, outed him to his family. They outed it with an AIDS headline, because in the show that I was in at the time, there was an AIDS storyline. And I remember the headline. It said, "Secret Gay Love of AIDS Scare EastEnder." And they put the location of where we lived. And that afternoon, a brick came through the window. It was the first brick, and it wouldn't be the last. And I tell that story because it gives an indication of how people were charged up against anything to do with AIDS and HIV.
And you think it was HIV/AIDS rather than more generalized homophobia are those two things very connected? Of course,
they're very connected. It's a spiral.
Yeah,
it's the double helix of hatred.
We've now got an excuse to hate these people.
Yeah. So you have, it's the double helix of Crick and Watson, except this one is hatred. You've got the homophobia and then the AIDS phobia, and they wind together, joined from one side of the helix to the other by politicians and tabloids and publishers of hate. And it's the same with the rising anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and racism and anti-migrant. It's all exactly the same. But then it's in a way, the silence that they wanted, I think, was why Thatcher and her government so quickly got behind the first anti-lesbian and gay law in 100 years, and that was Section 28. And I honestly don't think that without AIDS, that they would have felt they had the power to do that. I think there was a direct connection.
And Section 28 really feels like the start of the catalyst for your political activism. So you set that up beautifully for us. Thank you, Michael. Can you tell us a little bit about the advent of that law and how you and other people organized to fight against it?
Well, I was in EastEnders playing.
Didn't the Sun call it EastBenders?
Yeah.
Lord.
Before I was even in it, the front page of the Sun, the headline was EastBenders.
Great.
And it went downhill from there. It was awful. And again, when I said to the BBC, how will I cope? Because the BBC, the producer said to me, well, when I met her, Julia Smith, she said, we've been trying to cast a straight actor to play this part. Because she believed, she said, that it would be easier for the actor, who was straight, to say, I'm just playing a gay part. So there was I in the show. And I learnt that there'd been an amendment in Parliament to a Local Government Act banning the so-called promotion of homosexuality and the acceptability of gay relationships, and that they couldn't even be accepted as a pretend family relationship. It's really interesting to go back and read that clause, and it was a sanction against. At that time, most education was covered by local authorities. And it was a sanction against any local authority, education authority, like the Inner London Education Authority, that oversaw London and had a progressive attitude to comprehensive education, that it was a sanction to them that they would be breaking the law. And so I read about this in the good old free newspaper, Capital Gay. When I came out of Benji's, the gay club on the corner of Mile End, and read about it. And that was, I think, December 1987. And there was going to be a march in January, early January. And I knew I had to be on that march. I didn't discuss it with Paul. I didn't discuss it with anyone. And I went into work the week that it was leading up. And I was called on the Saturday for rehearsals, the day of the march. And I went up to the two actors that I was doing the scenes with and said, can we reorganize the Saturday rehearsals so that I get off early? And they went, yeah. June Brown, who played Dot. Oh, yeah, of course, Mike. Don't worry, dear. We can do that. and Wendy, who played Pauline Fowler, Wendy Richards. She went, yeah, of course we could do that. Anyway, I got there, and of course.
Did you try and get them to go with you?
Well, strange, I didn't, but actually much later, all of them, apart from two cast members who I've never named.
Interesting.
All of them, apart from two, came in right behind us and supported us. So I got into work, and June Brown, this wonderful One Nation Tory, said, leave it with me, Mike, dear. I'll go and see Bill. Go and see Bill. Bill was the director. And she got me about 2.5 hours off. So I jumped on the train. She went, now don't get arrested. We've got scenes to rehearse later, dear. So I jumped on the train, went down. And thereafter, I didn't look back.
Were you doing it? And I'm sure had you not been in the public eye at that point, you would have done it anyway. Did you do it knowing that the position that you held, that the fact that you could draw attention, did you do it knowing that that was going to help the cause or hopefully help, or did you just do it because you knew it was the thing you wanted to do?
I did it because, honestly, I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the face again. I couldn't, as a gay man, go on television twice a week, repeat episodes on a Sunday, make a living out of that, and throw away my principles and my integrity? No, because then as an actor, let alone a human being, that's all you have. And you know what? Years later, when my dad phoned me, I'd been in a program. I did a program about discrimination against gay and lesbians and where it came from. And he and my mum always phoned me. I could have raised a flag and they would have said, "We love you, brilliant." No, they would have said, "Brilliant, brilliant, son." And he rang me the next day and he said, "I want to tell you I'm proud of you." And I said, yeah, you told me last night. And he said, and there was a long, long pause. And he said, "And I love you." And that was the first time I actually heard my dad say, "I love you." And I think that was the day he realized that if he'd been gay and he'd been in the same situation with the same circumstances, he would have done exactly the same. And that's why I went on the march. And that night when I was on, the day of the march, I was on the news, and he turned to my mum and he went, "I don't mind him being gay, but does he have to go on the bleeding news about it?" So it wasn't an easy option for them. And it wasn't an easy option for my brothers with their kids at school, my other two brothers. But did any of them ever put pressure on me or give me a word of regret or reproach? Absolutely not. And so getting involved in that campaign and finding myself along with others like Ian McKellen, Lisa Power, spokespeople. We weren't spokespeople. We were speaking out against something that we thought was wrong. And interestingly, going back to AIDS and HIV and why I think the government saw it as a brilliant opportunity was I don't think they reckoned on people coming out. Because to come out as a gay man particularly, or as a bisexual man, was to be synonymous with being HIV positive. So their gamble was, I think their political gamble was, no, they'll go underground, which was precisely where they were pushing us and where those forces that are coming back today are still trying to force us, beginning with the migrants, beginning with women who don't know their place, who cannot have the right to choose, beginning with trans. That's exactly why they're coming back, because they believe they can force us underground, because underground is where we can live a better life, away from the sun. And so that campaign had strength because people came out, and by coming out, we ruined the stereotype that was represented as the threat to the family and a threat to children. And the campaign was largely successful because Ian McKellen, it was interesting, I was known to be a Labour supporter, so the Tories wouldn't really have much to do with me, although some in the Labour Party didn't want to have much to do with me either. I remember when Ian and I turned up after the debate around Section 28, and I won't name him because he's become a friend, but he looked at me and he knew I'd been agitating behind the scenes about the Labour Party's position on Clause 28, or Section 28 as we call it. And then he looked at Ian and he went, Ian, a real actor. And then looked at me. I thought, you can't put me down. I've had professionals do it. And so what Ian did rather cleverly, was he was pulled over towards the Tories because they thought he was posh and he went to Cambridge, so he must be one of them. And Ian, along with the political advice that we were all given, argued for the insertion of a key word, and that was intention. And so the legislation read, a local authority shall not promote homosexuality. It now reads, a local authority shall not intentionally promote. But I go back to, we kept saying, tell us what your definition of promotion is. And because it said a local authority, and this is where a huge swell of non-LGBT supporters came behind us, because actually a local authority has libraries, it has theatres, concert halls. Are you saying that you can't perform the works of Tchaikovsky? You can't have the books of Genet, Oscar Wilde, the bisexual sonnets of Shakespeare? And so therefore, this narrow little focus that the Tories had with their silver bullet didn't hit its target, went everywhere else but, and it gave birth, I think, to a modern gay movement that was woken up because we'd been seduced by the pubs and the clubs and even our back rooms and our saunas. The sense that we belonged because of the licentiousness. Utter commercial crap.
And I think that I'd very much agree with you. I think also the sense of, well, we can now come out to our parents. We can live sort of the lives that we want to live and that we hope to live with partners. And so therefore, everything's kind of broadly there. We've kind of, and clearly there's a lot to go. Maybe we're sort of, or have been lulled into that false sense of security in recent years, not maybe right now, but in maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we had equal marriage, we had civil partnerships, all these things had come in, and maybe there was a sense of, well, we've achieved what we wanted to achieve, because if you look at it through a narrow lens of legislative equality, maybe it was sort of there, still big gaps, but maybe sort of there, but it was the hearts and minds that were not, that hadn't been transformed, but there was a sense of taking foot off the gas and saying, well, we don't need to do this, we can go back to party.
I agree with you, but I don't, it's not in the past tense, it's in the present tense. People, there is a sense of, listen, they're attacking trans, that's got nothing to do with us, right? We've got equal marriage, we can have our kids, as long as we keep our heads down amongst the school governors. No, you precisely have what you have because people died in terrifying isolation. Oscar Wilde in manacles was walked through London onto a train into Reading jail because of whom he loved and because it dared, in error, to go public. The rights we have, we don't, this notion that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We do not. We stand on the shoulders of ordinary men and women who actually had the courage to speak out, the courage to stand up and say, no, you can't say that. You're talking about my son. You're talking about my daughter. The organisation that there is, the flag of which I'm a patron, I'm not saying it about the organisation because of that, but the power of that organisation that over 30 years came into being because of Section 28. Its power is that when you attack the family using LGBT people, they say, you're talking about my family and my gay son, my trans daughter. And that's why every time a gay couple say, or a lesbian couple say, I do, they are saying that because thousands of generations could not. And it's precisely because of that you don't relinquish rights, you don't dilute rights. You know, I remember the brilliant organisation that I, along with Ian McKellen and Lisa Power and others, founded, Stonewall. When Stonewall was umming and ahhing about whether it supported equal marriage, because there were some who didn't believe in the heteronormative approach. I'm surprised I can even say it, let alone look it up in a dictionary to find out what it means. But my message to them was, what do you not understand about the definition of equality? Equality means you have the right to opt in or opt out. And if you opt in, and again, this is what a lot of people don't understand by equality. They pose equal rights as a threat. No, equality actually reinforces the rights of others, because with equality comes the equal obligation to abide by the same laws and the same rules. That's what they leave out of the equation. So the notion of contentment, of keeping quiet, like they wanted us to do around AIDS and HIV, so that those men and women didn't go on the streets in New York and in London, that outrage didn't stand up and try to arrest the Archbishop of Canterbury. All of those things, those happenings, those single voices are why we have what we have now.
But I think that what we've not appreciated is how fragile what we have now is, and how we need to keep fighting to keep what we have and to keep moving forward.
Well, it's, the only reason I want to get older at the age of 74 is I long for a threat to come from outer space, so that this world realizes it's not a whole range of separate countries, it's one entity. And then we get back perhaps to the Lenin concept of no borders, that we are all migrants, and that we then have that sense that actually you don't have to live with the other, but live beside the other.
In a strange way, COVID pandemic kind of sort of did that for a fleeting moment, made us all realize, oh, we are actually all a community coming together to fight this thing, whatever it is. And of course, it was terrible in many ways, but that sense of community that it developed was really fascinating and interesting, almost in a way that evaporated almost immediately afterwards, sadly.
But look at those, look at those who said, oh, but actually the vaccine doesn't work. So those deniers, and so and we have to remember the attack on rights is never an attack on rights because of us. They say, no, it's because we need to protect others. What Trump is doing and continues to do with removing diversity and inclusion and equality programs is actually a rawer version of what we normally get. Completely opposed because don't believe in any of it. You're either one of us or you're not. It's that political idea. It's Thatcherism in ascendance. If you're not one of us, then you're the enemy. But the attack on rights, whether it's the rights of people because of their religion, their ability, their belief, whatever, is always based on protecting others. And a number of times people would say, "Oh, but you're different because you're not like them, are you? Or you're in a relationship, you've got someone." It's the notion of painting someone who's different as a threat that allows them to legitimize the removal of your rights because it's to protect other people, and you've got to put up with it.
The number of rooms during Brexit that I would sit in where people were talking about the migrant issue. And I would say, but I'm a migrant. I moved here 20 years ago. My grandmother was Scottish, which is how I got here, which is quite a nebulous connection, right? And they're like, oh, no, we don't mean you. We don't mean you.
Yep.
We mean those other people. I think people have an idea of institutions, particularly advocacy institutions, that they often start in these very grand circumstances. And I would love to hear about the start of Stonewall, because I believe it's, like many activist institutions actually are, it's quite a small, humble beginning that then became probably the leading advocacy organization in the UK.
Well, we because of the success of winning the arguments against the anti-LGB law, first in 100 years, we have to remind ourselves, that we won the arguments, we won the debates, and there's some wonderful archive that I've just been going through of when one of the proponents of Section 28, Jill Knight, was asked to give evidence, she said, well, I wasn't told I would have to bring it, and I had to come here in a hurry, so I don't have any examples. Couldn't even remember an example. So having won having won the arguments, and having found how to just be direct and honest with the media, I remember a week after the law went through in 1988, May 1988, and I rang Ian McKellen, and Ian lived down on the river at Limehouse, and Paul and I were up at Mile End, and I said, Ian, we've got to form an organisation so another Section 28 doesn't happen again, and ran through all of the arguments, and Ian politely listened, and then a week later rang me and said, my darling, I think you should come down. Douglas is here, Douglas Slater, and he has exactly the same idea. Now, I don't think it was because Douglas also went to Cambridge that Ian listened to him, and not to the rantings of the secondary modern dropout. And Douglas Slater was sadly no longer with us, but he worked in the Chief Whip's office, the Conservative government's Chief Whip's office in the House of Lords, and he was our mole on what was going on in the government. So Douglas, who is actually, if you go to the Queer Museum, there's the founding document of Stonewall, signed by 6 of us or 7 of us after a boozy lunch. And Douglas, who'd equally had imbibed on the lunch, signed it, but because he wasn't known to be out as a activist, put his name in brackets, so, as if people wouldn't notice. And so that was the beginning. And it was very much a matter of going through the people we knew, the people we'd worked with. And that's why Jenny Wilson and Lisa Power sprung up immediately. They'd been around the Organisation for Lesbian and Gay Action. And Lisa, whom I didn't know before, had spent a lifetime in sweatshop and activism. And I say Lisa and Jenny because that was crucial, because it stopped being a group of men, forming a group of men to fight for equality, which would have been one particular view of equality, bringing in Deborah Ballard and Deborah from the Arts Lobby, which was a group of LGBT plus and non-LGBT artist creators who used to come together during the Section 28 months. So Deborah Deborah Ballard was a part of that group, and bringing those women in, Fiona Cunningham-Reid, a filmmaker, her coming in as well. These were crucial. Pamson Clement joined us. And these were crucial in that it was lesbians and gay men coming together and then quietly being sent off to get the Articles of Association drawn up, to get the way a charitable arm of the organisation would work, because in those days you couldn't argue for political change and be a charitable organisation. So we spent about a year quietly setting it up, going from one person's sitting room to another. I remember Ian at one point looking up, and he used to have a lovely, well-stocked wine rack or wine racks in his kitchen. And he looked up and he said, "Get another." "Oh, there's none left." That's where activism gets you. And we drank him dry. But we went from basically 3 houses, Ian's in Narrow Street, Lisa and Jenny's in Burdett Road, and me and Paul in Mile End, in that crazy little East End triangle. Stonewall was given its birth. And and it was also crucial that we brought in some conservative people that were known to be conservative supporters, so it wasn't seen as merely just another brilliant, though that would be another left-wing approach to solving the problems of inequality. And that was the beginning. And we had no money. Our remit was that it had to be run by equal numbers of women and men. That was there in the Articles of Association. That we wouldn't take any public money. So we had to raise the money to get the money so that we could have an executive director. We put on an amazing benefit, One Night Only, of Bent by Martin Sherman, because we thought that said it all, really, about where silence leads you, where, as they loaded up the gay men and the trade unionists and the gypsies and the Jews, nobody said anything until there were millions that had gone. And that powerful reminder, brilliantly directed by Sean Matthias, One Night Only at the Adelphi Theatre. And we were still rehearsing, and I say this because it's important for me as a gay man to recognise this, that we were still rehearsing at 7:10, the audience due to come in at past:30. The house manager ran in and said, Mr. Matthias, you must stop rehearsing. You must allow me to bring in the audience. And Sean went, get out. Anyway, he went out. 5 minutes later, he came in. He said, Mr. Matthias, we have to open the theatre. The police have demanded it. The West End traffic has come to a halt because the crowd had swelled out onto the road, and the last time that had happened had been for Judy Garland when she appeared at the Dominion.
Oh, wow.
So I felt rather proud.
Amazing.
And we raised we made £35,000. That was 1989. And that gave us enough money to hire our first executive director, get a tiny office moved from somebody's bedroom, Peter Ashman's bedroom in Islington, to a tiny room in Strutton Ground, Victoria, so that we could say we had Westminster offices. And Cameron McIntosh, who I went to see, and asked him to give us money towards the production costs. He gave us $5,000 towards our production costs, and I told him how much we'd made, and nobody else had matched his generosity. And within the space of a few days, another check for $5,000 came, and it said, well, now you've covered your production costs. That's what Section 28 did.
Mm-hmm.
It made us decide where we wanted to be amongst the silent, hidden, luxuriating mob that wouldn't be worried about inequality, or those who actually could step forward and say, no, we're all in this, we're all doing it.
We're coming, I'm afraid, rapidly to the end of our time, but a lot of what you've described is, in my mind, sadly feels very reminiscent of where we are now politically in many respects. And you've talked about Trump, and you've talked about DEI attacks and attacks on trans and asylum seekers and others. But I think at the same time, people are also losing confidence in politics and in the political process to protect our community, minority communities and others. And if you ask young people, a poll came out recently, they said they'd be quite happy with a dictator in charge. And all of this feels very scary and a very scary place to land. What are your feelings about where we are now and where we're going? And more importantly, what we need to do about it.
Okay.
How we get motivated and activate.
First of all, the best prime ministers operate when they are dictators, because by and large, they should reach agreements that everybody else and decisions that everybody else agree with. And where there is dissent, the dissent is recognized. Politics is in a bad place because we don't allow politicians the luxury to fail. And if we want success, we have to allow people to get it wrong and to be able to say that for all the best intentions, they didn't get it right. You know, I look at my old profession, and some say, watching me in the House of Lords, I haven't left it, my old acting profession. How do we achieve excellence that we put on the stage? By going into a room where we're encouraged to make mistakes, encouraged to try something different. If we really want this world to change, we've got to empower people and give them the license to get it wrong. But the demand to be honest about getting it wrong. I think the institutions of government have failed around the world. Capitalism cannot care and is now seen at its boldest as not caring. Can we change that overnight? No. But I don't want to argue for my rights. I want to argue for everybody else's, because I think that's the only way we can go forward. I think we're back to where we were because for far too long, one is played off against the other. That we can afford housing, but we can't afford to house people. Bullshit. We need billionaires in order that we can have people earning the minimum wage. Bollocks. Let's look at a system that has a degree of redistribution at its heart, but crucially, a sense of relationship to the other. Why do I get so passionate about what's happening to trans people? Well, because my history reminds me that it's not very long ago, in my own lifetime, that exactly the same was said of me. Me as a threat, by being who I am, by wanting to live by the same laws as others. It makes absolutely no sense. And they're allowed to get away with it because of the misinformation peddled again by one of the great institutions, the press and the media. So we have to challenge the lies. But more importantly, we can only go forward. And again, it's something I go back to time and time again, which is the courage to stand in the shoes of the other. I do a lot of work on asylum and immigration and refugees, as well as other things in the Parliament. And I say, imagine you are that woman with your child in your arms and your tall, spindly 17-year-old son who actually looks 25 because he's Syrian. Imagine you're that woman with your family about to step into that dinghy, not at the beginning of your journey, but at the end of a very, very long journey. Imagine you are that woman and what happens to that family. And if you wouldn't want it to happen to you, then how dare you allow it to happen to others? And that, the defense of the other, ending the othering, the culture war encouraged by Johnson, let leash by Braverman and Badenoch, and those silent and terrified on the left who would not challenge it. All of that has grown into the brashness and the hooliganism that we see from Trump and Vance, because we've allowed people to be othered. Mm-hmm. But if you say no, you cannot do that to another human being. I'm not religious, but I defend absolutely somebody's religious belief. I believe in the concept of responsibility of the one to the other. I can't exist on this planet ignoring my rights to others, otherwise I will cease to exist. So the selfish gene of belonging only really works when you defend other people. And that, for me, is the political way forward. I think at the moment the Labour Party hasn't found its voice. It hasn't found its story of why it wants power. And that, to me, is crucial in all forms of politics. What's your story? What do you want with my trust? And by giving you my trust, I will allow you to run with it so long as you keep telling me or occasionally tell me what the story is. Because in the end, life is, and politics is life. Life is a bit like a play. If you haven't got them by the interval, they won't come back to you. Or if they do, they come back not really convinced that you can do it. Open up your story politically. Tell me why you want us to make the sacrifices. But more importantly, allow someone who doesn't fit in to fit in by not fitting in. It's so simple. Because if I can see it, any idiot can see it.
Michael, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure having you here today. We are incredibly grateful, both for your time here, but also for a lifetime of activism.
Well, thank you both. And it's been a joy. And I just wish we didn't have to remind people of some of the things that we've had to remind them about. But having been reminded, my message to you listening or watching is there's no excuse now.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The View from Here. Of course, there's a lot of politics in any movement, but the political views you've heard across the series don't necessarily reflect the views of the podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review, as well as sharing the word on social media. Join us next time for more personal stories from the front lines of LGBTQ+ history.